get some more copies, but I don't think you really need any. But yeah. All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started if we can. First, just so this is the committee meeting for the CDBG funding. Here present we have Counselor at Large, Counselor Green, President Temple, Counselor Bay, and myself, Counselor Allen, and also President Helen. She'll be right back. She went to get some more copies made. So if we can, we'll ask Commissioner Pasquale to come up. Did you want to sit here or would you rather stand?
Oh, it's up to you.
You can sit with us.
Okay.
Because you might be up here for a while. Okay. And you can if you can, like, give a brief description of why we actually have to go back over the budget.
Sure. Thank you. Good afternoon. Oh, it's morning, right? Good morning, everyone. So upon about 2 or 3 weeks ago, we were informed by the Department of Housing and Urban Development of our final allocations for the block grant. And we were pleasantly surprised, as we discussed a few times in this forum, that we received budget increases over what was expected when we went through the allocations process earlier in 2018. So if you'll recall, when the original budget that was approved by Council in March had percentages of everyone's allocation listed in the right-hand column, so that if we did receive an allocation that was within 15% plus or minus of what we expected, we would apply those percentages and submit that plan to HUD. The actual amount we received was just above 15%, so we decided to reopen public comment for the budget that was released a few weeks ago. And what this budget reflects is an overall increase in the community development block grant, an increase in the home investment partnership, and about stable funding over last year for the emergency solutions grant, or ESG. So with that, what we had proposed to the public and to the council was to apply those percentages with the new allocation to the budget items for each of the applicants, noting that no applicant could receive more than they asked for. So you'll see some of the applicants in the budget are allocated to receive about what they've asked for and no more if you apply the percentages. So that allowed for about $128,000 overage. So once we applied that formula, there was about $128,000 left over, if you will, that exceeded what folks asked for. That was applied to a line in the budget. We had initially expecting a significant decrease or cut in these funds. We had not allocated funding to what's called NBD distressed property, and that's the line we've been using for several years to address strategically blighted vacant property, whether it's for renovation dollars or blight removal or demolition dollars. So we took the $128,000 and applied it to NBD distressed property, and to get up to $200,000, we also took money out of our own administration, so that we were slightly under the 20% cap for administration for NBD. So that, in summary, is how we handled the community development block grant. The home investment partnership, we applied our community housing development organization, or CHODO organizations, used that percentage again, and there was a slight increase in their operating in the new budget. As well as CHODO generated activities and what we call the redevelopment, or the larger developer subsidies and direct home buyer assistance fund. In the emergency solutions grant, I believe we just applied the percentages as they were allocated and approved in March.
Thank you. Did anyone have any questions yet?
Can you just tell me a little more about the distressed properties, like what properties would qualify and how it gets determined?
Sure. So it's a rolling application process for the distressed properties, and typically when we address vacant structures, only about a third are tax seizable. So we often use the land bank as a mechanism for gaining site control of problematic vacant structures. NBD distressed property allows for a strategic acquisition and redevelopment of properties, whether it's renovation or demolition, particularly near other investments. So if we're investing in a new construction or a rehab, but there's that other house on the block that's causing a lot of problems, but it's tax current and there really doesn't seem to be another way to address the property, we're able to use those funds on an application basis to sort of surgically go in and address those parcels. So it's a rolling application process that our housing partners will apply for, but often our office will identify these properties and work in partnership with the relevant groups to address that issue.
Yep.
How is MBD determining which structure may be a demolition candidate?
That's a great question. So through the vacant property registry, oh, sorry.
I was asking, how is MBD determining which structure is a demolition candidate?
So through code enforcement and the vacant property registry and the team that addresses the vacant structures, those assessments that are occurring regularly throughout the year, the code officers have been grading or rating properties from a scale of 1 to 5 over the last several years, with 1 being could be a demolition candidate to 5 being it's just fine. It just we hope to attract investment. Often though, from the exterior you can't always tell. So we'll either seek an inspection warrant, or if there's another means of entering the property, like if there was a fire or some other issue in which staff, city staff have been inside and they determine the structural integrity of the building and provide an assessment of whether or not structurally it can go, if it's in need of demolition.
Last question on this. Just a concern. Is there any chance we may be labeling some structures demolition candidates that are not structurally unsound?
You mean, are we tearing down buildings that aren't structurally?
Probably shouldn't be torn down. Yeah.
Not to my knowledge. We get full assessments of what the condition is and what the renovation budget would be for a property if we were to try to seek renovation. As I mentioned, just some properties, if they're sort of near or abutting other investment and there doesn't seem to be any other strategy available, we always try to seek renovation first and foremost, but sometimes the properties are just beyond repair. And we do trust the assessments both of our own staff as well as architects that have walked through the building, or engineers that provide reports to us about what the condition is of the building, depending on why or how they had access to it, as well as the fire chief.
Okay, so now I have one more.
Sure.
So if I heard you correctly, then sometimes a determining factor on whether a structure is a demolition candidate is whether it's determined that the cost for the rebuild is too much, not necessarily that it's not structurally sound.
Well, even a property that is about to collapse, if you had unlimited resources, you certainly could like rebuild, jack it up and rebuild foundations, and you could spend $300,000 structurally shoring up, I think, any structure. And I think it's a determination based on just our experience, the degree to which a property, if there's a lot of black mold, a lot of water damage, if the actual interior structure would have to all be rebuilt in terms of the shell itself, the inside of the shell. So I guess the answer to your question, I think any structure, if you did have unlimited resources, you could save it. I think we just try to use experience and use our judgment.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I was trying to kind of separate the reasons for demolition, right? So one, obviously, if a structure is not sound, then it could most certainly be a demolition candidate. If finance is an issue, then that's a different issue, right? So, okay, it's structurally sound, but there's a lot of potential cost for rehabbing this building. So it makes more sense to tear it down, which I'm not sure if that's the case, if it's going to cost more than that to put something back. So one question is about how structurally sound the structure is. The other is about dollars and cents. Mm-hmm. Is it really cheaper to demolish one and put one back, or did we end up spending more money in the end on the demolition plus construction versus just rehabbing the structure to begin with? And last thing I'll ask, if some of you remember, I was concerned about the houses that was torn down on Midland and Baird, because I made the argument that I wasn't sure all of them were structurally unsound, and they just kind of disappeared. Just throwing that out there. I said it a couple of years ago when you took it down, and we had that concern with that one little shack that was left. Just saying that to kind of jar some of your memory about the conversation. But when I posed that question to some, I won't say any names, to some people before, about whether they were in fact structurally unsound, the response I got was kind of like, I don't think so. I think they just, thinking nobody wanted them, they tore them down. Right. And we certainly can't do that, So I just want to make sure, we know error happens, and we're talking about funding more, put money more toward distressed properties. But I need to, I'm concerned that we're using the right judgment and making sure that in our efforts to improve neighborhoods, we're not in fact putting them in a debilitating or more debilitating situation, and ultimately spending more money where we could have saved some. Does that make sense?
No, I think it's important to, identify what the decision tree is on that, and to figure out, make sure that for any property that goes forward, we're able to justify the whys, photographic evidence and budgets and all kinds of things that that I believe we take into consideration, make sure that's well documented. Also, part of our vacant property task force, I think you're lighting a great fire for the different strategies that those teams have been working on for consideration for elevating, properties to that decision. What's included and how can we? I should be able to document that to you and make sure. I just want to highlight, though, that these funds we also do use for renovation gaps as well. Sometimes it just needs that last 10 or 15 that all these other sources we try to put together almost make it. Or if the home buyer, we can't sell a property that exceeds 30% of their income. So it's like, oh, I want this house, but it's $85,000. I need $10,000. If I can only afford $75,000. So it allows for that tiny subsidy as well for renovation.
Is there ever a cap that you guys have on the amount of money you're willing to spend on the renovations? Is there a cap, like a overall?
In general, we don't invest more than $75,000 per unit for properties. Sometimes there's exceptions to that, but in general, I think our average is closer to 50. But in general, that's where we're at, both with home and with CDBG.
If it's over the $75,000 and you guys put it on the demo list?
Not exclusively,
okay.
But that we take into consideration both and what other funders can put into the. We're usually not the only funder in there, so there might be New York State Attorney General dollars or Affordable Housing Corporation or New York State Home. There's a lot of other sources that could be in the mix. So there's a lot of. I know it's not that clear cut, but I can appreciate the question.
Okay, thank you.
And before I go into the program stage of it, I want to know the equity. How are you looking at distressed properties? Are you doing it in an equitable way around the city and not just in sections of the city?
Right. We really try hard to make sure it's equitable, and again, to support other investments that are being conducted, to make sure we're supporting well those other significant investments, whether it be near or about where a tax credit project occurred, or where we've had a lot of home ownership investment to continue to incentivize home ownership. But we've been investing the vast majority of our dollars right within the neighborhood revitalization strategy area, or the NRSA, which is those two. I know we show you guys the map all the time, but those two areas of disinvestment, and we really do try to provide particularly home ownership opportunities in the NRSA in those areas.
So let me ask you this, because I know you work closely with the land bank. So do you know in each quadrant what's in the land bank's inventory, that we can actually compare that to see how we're?
Sure. No, I could get it to you by neighborhood or by quadrant, or
I prefer it by quadrant, because when I go up in the West End or in the South End, I know I see a lot of the land bank signs there. So I want to know exactly where the investment is going to take place, if those are going to be the neighborhoods that you're going to hit, because those are the hardest hit neighborhoods. So I would like to see a little more equity being spread around when it comes to developing those different neighborhoods.
Okay, you had another question, right?
Just programming, because I'm looking, because you, as everybody knows, that I work for the United Way, and I know that we're going to be cutting programs, and some of the programs are some of the ones that we may fund. A lot of them we may not, and some of the smaller ones, I'm concerned that it would actually, shut down their operation. So I would like for us, and that's why I gave you the list, because I would like for us to take a look and see what we do fund, and if we could kind of plug some of the gaps, because some of them aren't that big. So if we look at what we fund, we may be able to stop the bleed on some of that.
Did you already know which ones were in the most
Actually,
critical
no,
stages?
I didn't bring my list to see what we fund through CDBG. So.
this
There's a
one's on.
few on there, I know. Because I have my community impact person here that could kind of touch base on a little of the programming that
You
we
wanna
do. Yeah, Mr. Doherty. He's not paying me any attention. Luke Doherty. Luke,
Mr. Doherty?
would you like to address some of the cuts?
I see, they only need, they got cut 2,000 from there.
Sorry, what was the?
Talking about some of the cuts to some of the smaller programs and how we may be able to fill the gap with the CDBG funding. So if you could address some of the programs that we're looking at.
Okay, sure. Good
You
afternoon,
don't have to call
Council.
them by name.
Okay, yeah, so as of July 1st, we'll be United Way of Central New York, that is, we'll be making generally across the board cut of about 5% to our funded programs. Currently, we're funding 87 programs at 33 human service agencies in Onondaga County. This year, the Community Program Fund, which funds those programs, was about $3.5 million. We were not able to achieve that goal for this year, so we'll be cutting those programs, particularly the ones that would be affected by the block grant or ESG, our emergency shelter programs, and some other basic needs. The cuts vary. You know, some of the larger agencies, of course, are receiving the largest cuts dollar-wise, and those include, you know, some of our services for some of our most vulnerable populations. We are asking the agencies themselves to allocate the cuts the way that they see fit, in the least painful way. We will be discussing that with them over the next month, you know, hoping to avoid, of course, any cuts that would, you know, put people out in the streets or, you know, really endanger any vulnerable populations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Was that all, President? That's all you had?
Yes.
Okay. So as far as the ones that are on this list from United Way Agency and the ones that were already on our list, would it be possible to be able to fill the gaps just for the ones that were already on our list?
Well, in some respects, it's possible. In some, it's not. If it depends on a number of things. If it's a similar activity, yes. So
Okay.
if this is the same, this is agency names, not program names.
Right.
So activity for activity, yes. What would be required if it was a new activity would likely be an RFP process. So we could pass a budget with a little bit on the side for RFPing different services that would reflect where the gaps are here. But I could work with Luke to find out what the programs were, but I will, so just probably should have highlighted this earlier. So originally when you know, CDBG was zero in the president's budget, we really wasn't getting any guidance about how to prepare a budget, you know, without knowing how much we were going to get. So we had anticipated a 10% cut, but we ended up getting about a 7.7% increase. So that switch did allow a lot of organizations in this list. If you look at what they requested and what we're drafting as the allocation, they're the same. So that means they asked for a certain amount of money and we are giving it to them. So I don't know that we can exceed what they asked for to run that program. So for example, with Catholic Charities, I not mean to pick on them, they're receiving what they asked for. So I can't add to that unless there's an RFP for a particular service, and it would cause delays. We could approve a certain budget with, and poor Counselor Bay, I'm not picking on you, but I remember when we RFP'd for CPR training services. So it just meant we put a line in here that said CPR training services, didn't say who it was going to. We RFP'd it, an entity got it, and they provided those services, if that makes sense. Because we already did the whole RFP process. We already sent them out last September. And
Yeah, we're gonna have to talk about that because I don't think it was done right. But we'll talk offline.
well, the
about
process for getting there in terms of how you allocate it, yeah.
I think one, Councilor Allen mentioned this, one agency that I think will certainly fill the cuts they receive from United Way is the Westcott Community Center. And they have not received what they asked for, CDBG. I understand the point, though, about programming being different than that. It may require a different request if what they're asking for the money to use, what they're intending to use the money for is different from what their CDBG request is. But that's one programming where I think.
And Huntington is actually, because we could close Huntington up if it's in the programming structure and still not give, they'll get what they need, but they're only short here. So there's only like 5 or 6 on here that I would, ask you to look at the programming and see if we could fill that gap in.
Yeah, there's still a gap on ours for Huntington. It's like almost 10,000.
Right, but right.
Yeah. Okay. So it's only a few that I feel that are critical programs for our community that I feel like should get the full amount. And Westcott was one of them, and as well as Huntington.
And Welch Terrace, if you look at that one too.
I don't think you decreased it on United Way. Didn't decrease it.
Yeah, did we? No. Yeah, 2%.
Councilor Thompson, did you have any questions?
Yes.
Okay.
My concern was relative to home headquarters here. The $2 million was originally requested. We went up to 1.4. I see that the others are, in fact, increased to what they were asked for. So urgent care. I mean, this is. I know when you came to us, you said if the increase. If an increase occurs, that you would look at the areas, and one of the areas that we spoke about was making sure that home headquarters got funded to the fullest that it could because of the programs that they run for the housing and the emergency housing and such. So I'm asking about this one here. What is going to be the impact on this? And I guess the second question would be, if we made the changes in what the other counselors are speaking about and the president's speaking about, does that mean it comes from somewhere else? Or do you have a little pot of gold hidden somewhere?
I wish. So those, all order of ask. So for home headquarters for urgent care, this new allocation reflects about a $250,000 or $260,000 increase over what was allocated, not just in the original budget, but over last year, year 43, the one that just ended April 30. Regarding making any changes, we'll have to figure out where, if there are allocations that need to move, we'll have to figure out where to take those from.
Okay, so this is actually, it's less than was asked for, but more than what they got.
Correct.
Right. Okay. That's mine. Thank you.
So they ended up, this one, their increase was the 259,000?
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay. More than what they would have gotten if we didn't get this increase.
Correct.
But they're still short because they requested $2 million.
Correct.
Okay. How you doing, Councilor Rudd? So you missed a lot, but do you have any questions? No. Okay.
Later, or I'll watch it.
Okay. Councilor Green?
I know questions.
Yes,
I guess the only one other question, and it might have already been answered, is on the demos side. Is this for emergency demos, or is this going to be added to the land bank stuff of demos?
It's not going to be added to the land bank items, and it would be emergency only if the amount you approved in the July 1 budget for codes couldn't address properties.
Okay. So it's above and beyond.
Right.
Okay. It's very necessary, you know. So, yeah.
Do we see that we may be getting any more money from anywhere for demos? across the state?
I believe decisions, to my knowledge, have not been made from the New York State Attorney General with, you know, the changes that are happening there, but they did secure 2 large settlements that were in the paper over the last few months. So I'm hopeful that there's just for redevelopment, whatever that looks like, that there'll be more resources for redevelopment.
Okay. Did you have anything you wanted to close out with, or no? Okay, Deputy Mayor.
I just want to, and you've already made this point, to the programs that you're looking at, essential, that suffered the United Way cuts, and the ability to look at programs like home headquarters and the service they provide. And you've already stated this, but I just want to reiterate, that would mean it would come from somewhere else. So what would help us is priorities from you as we look at this. I would say that the being able to allocate monies to the distressed property line is good in our favor. It gives us some more flexibility outside of the current processes we have. So to be able to absolutely maintain that that line, I think works for us in the long run. But some priorities from you all will help in that decision making, because somebody is not going to be happy at the end of this. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the question. Okay. All right. Well, we'll close out with that. Thank you very much.